was the hardest part of having immigrant parents? When I was 7 years old, my parents made me translate a doctor telling my 4-year-old brother Henry that he had leukemia because they'd lived in Japan for 5 years and still refused to learn a single word of Japanese. My parents moved to Tokyo when I was 2 for Dad's job at an international finance firm where everyone spoke English. Within a year, I was fluent while they remained militantly monolingual. Mom called it maintaining our American identity. Dad said learning Japanese would make him soft at work. By the time I was 5, I was translating their restaurant orders. By 6, I was reading their mail and explaining utility bills. By 7, I was sitting in a pediatric oncology ward trying to explain to my baby brother why he had to stay in the hospital while my parents stood there useless, demanding I translate faster. The doctor kept looking at me with horror as I stumbled through words like chemotherapy and white blood cells in terms a 4-year-old might understand. He asked repeatedly if there was another adult who could help, but my parents had made sure there wasn't. "We're Americans," Dad would say when neighbors tried to communicate. "If they want to talk to us, they can learn English." So there was no one to help us, just me. When my little sister Grace was born during Henry's treatment, I had to arrange everything around his chemo appointments because our parents couldn't fill out hospital forms. I'd sit with Henry during his infusions, reading stories while Grace slept in a carrier on my chest, 2 babies depending on a 7-year-old because their parents were too proud to learn Japanese. My parents would scream when I couldn't translate complex medical concepts perfectly. Dad threw a chair in the hospital when I couldn't explain why Henry's treatment wasn't working fast enough. Mom would slap me for miscommunicating when doctors delivered bad news. But Henry survived 5 years of treatment and he beat the cancer. But the medical stress had broken something inside me. I'd started having seizures myself from the pressure, collapsing during translations, waking up in the same hospital where Henry had been treated. The doctors were clear. The stress was causing neurological damage. If I didn't stop acting as a one-person translating team for the most stressful situations in my life, the seizures would cause permanent brain damage. They wanted to hospitalize me, but who would take care of my family? So I hid my condition, taking medication in secret, lying about the bruises from falling, until Dad got sued by a client and needed me to translate his entire court case. I'd already had 2 seizures that week. My vision would blur mid-conversation. The morning of the trial, I felt the familiar aura starting. Another seizure coming. I chose to lie about having the flu. Dad's face went purple while Mom begged. They had to hire an emergency translator. When they returned, Dad had lost everything, and he presented me with a bill for the translator without even asking me if I was okay. But I was too exhausted from the seizure I'd hidden in my room to care. A doctor told me about a boarding school in Kyoto that was attached to a neurological clinic that specialized in stress-induced disorders. The doctor said I might recover if I removed myself from the trauma. My parents couldn't read the acceptance letter, so they had to believe me when I told them the school was mandatory in Japan for students with good marks. They raged, begged, and tried to force me not to go, but I faked calls with lawyers and told them sadly that if I didn't go, I'd be thrown in prison. Henry begged me not to leave. What if I get sick again? Grace clung to my legs, but I left anyway, telling myself that my parents would finally have to step up now because they couldn't place the burden of translating on their young, medically fragile child. At the clinic, I started recovering. The seizures decreased. For 3 days, I thought I'd made the right choice. Then my aunt called in hysterics. My parents had been arrested. Without me translating, they'd ignored court summons for Dad's financial crimes. Police found the children alone, and now Henry and Grace had been taken to separate government facilities. The social workers found Henry's medical records. They say he needs specialized care only certain foster families can provide. Grace is in a different ward. Henry's foster family lives in Hokkaido. Grace would stay in Tokyo. The siblings I'd worked my whole life to protect were going to be separated and placed with strangers. What if Henry got sick again? My hands started shaking, the familiar pre-seizure tremor. "He keeps showing them a picture from his treatment," my aunt continued. "You and him and baby Grace in the hospital. He won't stop crying." The principal knocked. A car was waiting to take me back to Tokyo. If I went back now, the stress would trigger more seizures. The doctors had warned that returning could cause permanent brain damage. But if I stayed, Henry and Grace would be separated forever. The boy I'd helped survive cancer would lose his sister. The driver was loading my bags, and I only had minutes to decide whether to save my siblings and destroy my brain, or save myself and let them lose each other forever. My hand trembled against the doorframe. Another seizure building. The engine idled outside, waiting for an answer that would either kill me slowly or destroy them immediately. Full story on the channel below.